Hi everyone. In this quick video, we're going to take a look at how you can connect to a remote Linux server that's hosted on Microsoft Azure using the default remote desktop client that's installed on Windows desktop. Alright, so these are the basic steps that you need to perform. So in a previous video, I have already showcased how you can connect to a Linux server using remote desktop, Windows remote desktop. So I'll point you to the specific video in the description of the current video. So I'm not going to be spending much time on setting that up in this video. The key steps for today's video is really based on the specifics of Microsoft Azure. So the various steps are to, of course, create the Linux VM on Azure. Make sure that you've installed the desktop on the VM and set up xrdp and any other specific desktop environments such as xfce. And then finally, we'll take a look at how we can enable the remote desktop endpoint and finally connect to the endpoint. So with that said, let's get started. So point your browser to the Azure portal, and within the portal, go to your virtual machines, and you'll want to create a new VM or maybe use your existing VM. So that's quite easy to do in Azure. From the gallery, you can select your preferred Linux operating system. So in my case, I've used the Ubuntu version 14 LTS edition. And then you can follow the wizard and click on next, fill in the required details, and your your Linux VM will be provisioned by Azure in just about a couple of minutes. Once you have provisioned the VM, the next step is if you click on the dashboard here, you should find the details to help you use SSH and connect to your VM. And once you're connected to the VM, you can use a tool like Putty or any other preferred SSH tool. And then you can install the desktop version. So you can run apt-get install and run Ubuntu desktop. There are options to provide parameters so that you can install the basic minimum desktop GUI. And the default, if you don't provide any parameters, it's quite a bulky install. It does install some of the applications like the LibreOffice application and several others. Post that, you will want to install the xrdp service on the Linux VM, and then finally you'll want to make sure that you have a different desktop environment. The reason for that being the default desktop environment that you get with Ubuntu is Unity, and that's really not supported anymore for connecting remotely. So you'll want to use a different desktop environment such as xfce, which is a lightweight desktop environment. So the details of these steps, that's 2 and 3, is already there in one of my previous video. Look at the description of the current video and it'll point you to the previous video. So assuming you've completed step 2 and step 3, the next step is to enable the Azure endpoint to support the remote desktop. So go back to the Azure portal, and if you go to the endpoints here and click on add, and add a new standard endpoint, and this time around select a remote desktop sorry remote desktop, and click on OK. I've done this in advance, so you'll notice that there's already another endpoint. When you create a Linux VM by default, it should create the SSH endpoint, and in addition to that, now you've just added the remote desktop option. And once you're done that, if you click on desktop, you'll notice that it adds the connect button here. And the connect doesn't appear as a default on Linux, but now that you've enabled the remote desktop as an endpoint, you find the option here. So if you click on connect, it downloads the shortcut for you to connect to the session via RDP. So if you click on that link, Yeah, it's opened up on my second screen here, so let me drag and drop that here. Okay. Then let me open that in full screen. So you'll notice that I've RDP'd into the Linux VM here. And now if I provide the required details, there you go. So it's actually connected to the remote session. I'm sorry, the remote VM. And if at all you notice that it is just staying at that gray screen, it's probably because you haven't set up XFCE or a different desktop environment to be your default when you connect over RDP or XRDP. So that's basically it. So you can see you have now access to your Linux VM that's hosted in Azure following these simple steps here. So hopefully that was easy to follow and got you started on using Microsoft Azure to connect to your Linux VM. Look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks.